All right, so today we are doing section 4.4. There is no 4.3, don't worry. Well, there is one, but we don't cover it. And this is factoring review. Today is the GCF, so the greatest common factor, and the X method. So the very first thing that we're going to do, so it's going to be two parts, okay? Very first one, you can see right there, factoring number one, the greatest common factor. I put right there, always try this first. Anytime you're going to factor, always ask yourself, do they have something in common? So that's what it says right there in red, right? Look for a number and or a variable that the expression has in common. So do they both have x's in common? Do they both have numbers that can be divided by 5 or by 3, by 2, something like that? Maybe I can take out negatives from everything. What do they have in common? And factor that out, okay? Because when you factor out things, it makes the rest of the expression simpler, okay? And then I said in green right there, I put factoring means to divide. So anytime I say like we're going to factor something, that means we're dividing by it, okay? So if I factor a 2 out of an expression, I'm basically dividing everything by 2, okay? So factoring means to divide, okay? So greatest common factor, the most common way of doing things is to look for a number or a variable that the expression has in common. So we're going to do a couple of these, but we're mostly going to focus on the X method, okay? But notice how right here we have number one, factor the common factor, okay? So sometimes it's just numbers, sometimes it's just letters, sometimes it's numbers and letters, sometimes it's a sign, okay? So it can be a lot of different things. Anytime you see a leading negative, my habit is to factor out the negative, okay? Because I don't like to see negatives in the very front unless they're in front of a parenthesis. So that's just my habit. That's something I like to do. But always look to see what do they have in common, okay? So for number one, part A, I see a 2x squared plus a 6. So first thing I ask is, do they have letters in common? Well, the first term has a 2x squared, but the other term is just a 6. There's no letter, so no letters in common. Is there a number that divides the two numbers there, 2 and 6? So that would be a 2, right? 2 is divisible by 2. 6 is divisible by 2. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to factor out a 2. Again, the word factor means I'm going to divide, right? So 2x squared divided by 2. I'm going to kind of write it right here on the side. Usually people don't do this, but I'm just showing you what your brain is doing, right? So when I say I'm going to factor a 2 from 2x squared, what I'm doing is I'm dividing it. 2x squared divided by 2, that cancels. So all that's left is x squared. Plus, then 6, if I factor a 2 out of 6, what I'm basically doing is saying 6 divided by 2. Well, that's 3. Okay? And that's it. You're done. This is factored. Okay? So we're done factoring this thing, and we move on. Okay, so this is GCF. Okay? This is GCF, greatest common factor. So for part B, you'll notice I have a leading negative, so I'm going to factor out a negative for sure. I notice they both have y values. One has a y to the first, one has y to the second, but they both have a y. And a number that can divide 6 and 12 would be 6, right? So I'm going to factor out a negative, a 6, and a single y, because that's what they have in common, at least one y. Okay, they don't both have two y's, but they have at least one y. So I'm going to factor out a negative 6y. Okay, and then in your head, you're supposed to kind of say this to yourself. What's the negative 6y, the one in black? Negative 6y, when you factor out a negative 6y, you're going to divide it. So negative 6y divided by negative 6y, that's equal to 1. Okay, and then the 12y squared, when you divide it by negative 6y, is a negative 2y. Because 12 divided by 6 is 2. It is negative because there's a negative there. And then y squared divided by y, well, there's two y's on top. There's one on the bottom. So if you cancel out what they have in common, there's only one left. So negative 2y. So you're going to put that right here. And you're done. Okay? So greatest common factors, it's the easiest way to factor. You don't need any kind of like special method, no tricks or anything like that. You just have to kind of work through it slowly. Okay? So let's continue with these two. These are a little bit more involved. And then after that, I think we go to the X method. Yeah. So what should I take out from part C? I mean, I see a negative in the front, so I'm going to want to take out a negative for sure. A negative 2, and then what about in terms of letters? Negative 2n, right? Not an n cubed, not an n to the 5th, because they don't all have 3 or 5 n's, but they all at least have 1 n. So I'm going to take out a negative 2n. Okay? And again, the work that I'm doing right now, that I'm about to do, you do not have to do. A lot of people just do that in their heads, but I'm showing you the process, okay? So I'm going to get the first term, negative 4n to the 5th, and I'm going to divide it by negative 2n, because again, factoring means to divide, right? Well, negative divided by a negative is a positive. 4 divided by 2 is 2, and n to the 5th divided by n is n to the what? 4th, right? So it's going to be 2n to the 4th. All right, now the next term, 2n cubed divided by negative 2n. So 2 divided by negative 2 is a negative 1. N cubed divided by n is n, yeah, second or squared, right? So just a negative n squared. Okay, and then the last part, negative 6n divided by negative 2n. Okay, so negative 6n divided by negative 2n, that's going to be a positive 3, and the n's are just going to cancel, so plus 3. And there we go. Again, all that stuff that I just did doesn't have to be shown. I usually just do that in my head, but I have enough practice over the years that it's easy to do, okay? But, you know, sometimes when you're working on this for the first time after a whole year, you kind of have to remind yourself, how is it that it's supposed to work, right? So I'm just showing you guys the process. All right, so this last one, what should I factor? 4x to the 4th minus x plus 10x squared. Can I factor any numbers out?
Negative x.
Well, I could take out a negative x if I wanted to, but I'm not going to take out a negative x. I will take out an x, yeah. Because I would only take out a negative if the 4x to the 4th was negative. I don't like leading negative, so I would take it out. Not that it's wrong, I just probably wouldn't do it, because it might just make a little bit more of a mess for me. But there is no numbers that I can take out, right? 4 and 10, I can take out a 2, but there's no number in the middle term, a negative 1, right? So I'm not going to take out any numbers, but I am going to take out a letter, and that letter is just going to be an x, okay? And then from there, it's just division. So 4x to the 4th divided by x, that'll be 4x to the 3rd, okay? Negative x divided by x, well, it's a negative 1. And then 10x squared divided by x, that's 10x. And that's going to be my solution for these. Okay, so these are considered the easier types of factoring, okay, GCF. That's always been considered the easiest type. After that, then we do by grouping, by difference of two squares, by X method or box method, some people like to call it in some cases. But, you know, that's other things that we are going to learn. So we are going to learn the X method today. Oh, that's fine. Yeah. Any questions on these? So we can kind of close up this part. So like I said, these are supposed to be the easier ones, but some people don't like doing this. But GCF is supposed to be easier. You're just looking for what do they have in common, right? You pull it out and then divide out. And again, you don't have to show any of the work that I did. That's just extra stuff in case you need to see it. All right. So the X method, some people like to call it the butterfly method because it kind of looks like a little butterfly, right? But the X method is something that we use to factor out trinomials, okay? So something that looks like ax squared plus bx plus c. Now there are two ways that you can do it, if a equals 1 and if a doesn't equal to 1. But to be honest with you, I always tell people just memorize this one, even if a is 1, okay? Now what's the difference? Well, okay, You're going to look at the left side, right? You're going to draw a big old X. That big X right there, you're going to draw it out. Notice how on the top of that X, it says A times C, and on the bottom it says B, right? So your A value, your C value, and your B value, they're all going to be used. You're going to fill them in, okay? And then you're going to think of two numbers. So I have the little number signs on the left and right side. You're going to think of two numbers that multiply to the number on top, or that and that add to the number on the bottom. Okay, so two numbers that multiply to the top and that add to the number on the bottom. Now, look at the one I circled. You see how those all say, where it says the numbers, it says all divided by A, right? Divide by A, divide by A. If A is equal to 1, you don't have to divide. But if A is equal to anything else, you do. Okay, but I always tell people, well, why are you going to learn two different ways? Just always divide. Okay, always divide. Even if it's a 1, just in your head think, okay, this divided by 1, well, nothing happens. Okay, we move on. All right, but always divide. It actually makes it easier for you to just learn one process versus two different processes. So right now I'll show you how this works in case you forgot. But remember, our A, B, and C are used in this method. Okay, A times C goes on top of the X, B goes on the bottom, bless you, and then we have to kind of mentally think of numbers that multiply, two numbers that multiply to the top that add up to the bottom. Okay, our factors, and then based on that, we can factor things out. So we'll get to that portion right now. But this is an old method. You guys have all seen this from before, right? Like. You may have done a box method, maybe. Some teachers like to teach guess and check, which is the way I learned guess and check. It's a little bit harder, but at the same time, it works with your multiplication, so you kind of sharpen your multiplication skills when you do guess and check. So, all right, let's get to the factoring. I think we have 5 of these, okay? So, notice this one is x squared minus 8x plus 12, okay? My A term is a 1. Okay, I'll put it right here. It's a 1. Okay, I'll even write it right here. A is 1, B is negative 8, and C is 12. Okay, because I'm going to need that. So, I'm going to make an X. On the top, I have to multiply A times C. So 1 times 12, that's 12. On the bottom, I got to write B, which is negative 8. Give me two numbers that multiply to 12 that add up to negative 8. I'll give you a hint. They're both negative. All right, negative 2, negative 6. Negative 2 times negative 6 is 12, so the two numbers multiply to 12. And negative 2 minus 6 is negative 8. Right? So, all right, we're good. Now, you're supposed, well, in this one, you're not supposed to divide by A because A is 1, but make it a habit to just divide, okay? So, negative 2 divided by A. Remember, that's this process right here, okay? This little part right here, dividing by A. So, just divide it by A, and if something happens, then write the new answer. But negative 2 divided by 1, nothing happens, and negative 6 divided by 1, nothing happens. So I usually, whoops, wrong color here. I usually just circle my answers once I'm done. Okay. Why am I going to circle them? Because I'm going to write them out in factored form. So this is what it looks like in factored form. I'm going to put 2 parentheses. Okay. Then in the very front, I'm going to write the letters that I'm factoring for. So I'm factoring x's. So I'm going to put x here, x there. And then my answers were negative 2 and negative 6. So I'm going to put minus 2. Minus 6, and that's it. Okay? This process is also not that difficult, but it is a process, right? You need to know, like, okay, on top I got to multiply A and C. On the bottom it's minus B, so let me do that. And then that's going to allow me to factor them out pretty well. Now, of course, you still have to check everything, test it, right? Make sure it works out. But once you get it to the right numbers, it's easy to write your solutions. So let's look at this one right here. So I'm going to write down my ABCs. So A is 1, B is 17, and C is 72. Okay? Now, since this is a trinomial, it's 3 terms, then I'm going to use the X method. All right? So On the top, I'm supposed to multiply A times C, so 1 times 72 is 72. On the bottom, I'm supposed to write the B value, which is 17. So now I need two numbers that multiply to 72 that add to 17. 9 and 8, both positive, right? So I'm going to put plus on. Whoops, that's not a 9. That's not an 8. I mean, that's a 9. So 9 and 8. So I can check it. 9 times 8 is 72. 9 plus 8 is 17. So that's good. I'm good. And then I'm going to divide by my A term just to make sure. So dividing by 1, well, it doesn't change the 9. It doesn't change the 8. So these are good answers. Okay? So those are good. So now just put two sets of parentheses, the letters that you're factoring for, and then put the factors you put, so plus 9, plus 8. By the way, you can write n plus 8, n plus 9, and they can be in different orders. It's fine. Okay, there isn't just one way to do it. But as long as there's a 9 and an 8 there, okay, you should be fine. So again, this stuff isn't meant to be like crazy difficult. Follow the process, right? The process that I showed you of your factoring. Now, you're going to notice for part C, we actually now have an A term, right? Other than 1. And these are the ones that a lot of people, they get scared of because they're like, oh, every time they have a number in the front, it makes everything more difficult. Not really, okay? It really isn't that much more difficult. It's just you got to do a little something at the end, but nothing too difficult. So let me go ahead and write down my ABCs here, okay? So A is 5, B is 16, and C is 3. So I'm going to do my X right here, and then multiply A times C, right? So 5 times 3, that's 15. And then B goes on the bottom, so that's 16. What two numbers multiply to 15 that add to 16? 1 and 15. So positive 1, positive 15. Let me change the color here. So positive 1, positive 15. But then I have to divide, right? I got to divide by A. So now on the left side, can 1 be divided by 5? No, right? So this is done. I can't do anything with that. On the right side, can 15 be divided by 5? How much is it? 3. So I'm going to put plus 3, and then I'm going to circle it. Okay? Those are my two factors. So I'm just going to do what I did before. I'm going to write the letter X here, and then a plus 1/5, a plus 3. But one of the common rules when you factor is no fractions. So, you see how I have that 1/5? I always tell people, you're going to take that 5 and you're just going to bring it to the front of the X. Okay, so I tell people just take the bottom up. So bottoms up, that's what you're doing. Okay, so it's going to look like this. 5x plus 1, x plus 3. And that's it. So if you ever have a fraction, just get the denominator of it and throw it in front of the variable. Okay, go ahead. Where did I get the 13? Oh, on the very top of the X? That's when you multiply A times C. For the top of the X part, you multiply A times C all the time. So 5 times 3 gave me 15. Now, part D is, I don't want to say it's tricky, but it's done like this for a reason, okay? Because we can just factor. We can do what we're supposed to do. I could say A is 10, B is negative 48, C is negative 10, right? And then when I multiply A times C, I put negative 100, and the numbers start to get really big. But I should be able to factor this before I do the X method. What number can divide 10 and 48 and the other 10? A 2. A 2 can divide that. Anything bigger, I think that might be the biggest number, but let's see, a 5 can divide 10 but not 48, and 10 doesn't divide 48. So yeah, 2 is going to be the best number. So before I actually do this problem, what I'm going to do is I'm going to factor out a 2. Now remember, when you factor, that means you're dividing, right? So 10 divided by 2, that's 5m squared, minus 48 divided by 2, that's 24m, minus, and then 10 divided by 2, That's 5 again. Now, I'm going to highlight this number really quick. Don't forget about this number, okay? A lot of people tend to forget about it. Whenever you factor first, they'll put their answer and they forget about that extra 2 that's hanging out by itself. Because what's going to happen is we're going to focus on this part right here only right now. Okay? We're just going to focus on that. So, what are my A, B's, and C's in this case? Let's see. So A would be 5, B would be negative 24, and C would be negative 5. Okay? That's dealing with only the little squiggly part, right? The little trinomial inside. So let's do the X method. So A times C. 5 times negative 5 is negative 25. And then B goes on the bottom, so that's negative 24. What two numbers multiply to a negative 25 and add up to a negative 24? 1 and negative 25, so positive 1, negative 25. So let's see, 1 times negative 25 is negative 25. 1 minus 25 is negative 24, so perfect, that works. Then remember, always divide by A. And in my case, my A is 5. So, oops, let me change that to blue. So I'm dividing by 5. Now on the left side, nothing's going to happen, okay? I can't divide that. On the right side, negative 25 divided by 5 is negative 5. Well, there's my answers, okay? Those two things that I circled. So let me write it out. I'm going to put it on the right side over here. So I'm going to get M plus 1/5 M minus 5. But then don't forget that 2 that was hanging out all by itself. So the 2 is going to go right in front. Okay? That 2 that I highlighted, don't forget about it. Because we factored it out. So you just got to follow along. Okay? Now, I can't have fractions. So remember, bottoms up, right? You're going to get this 5. You're going to put it in front of that M. So 2, 5M plus 1, M minus 5, and you're done. We got one more of these things, okay? And then we're done. I'm just trying to show you all like the weird little things that can happen with these problems. So if you're ever doing factoring like this, and you're thinking like, man, A times C came out to like 220 when I multiply them, like that's a huge number, right? Well, maybe you're supposed to do the GCF first. Factor something out first. Because right here, the original problem, A times C, was negative 100. But once I factored it, A times C became negative 25. Way easier, smaller number. Okay, so factoring is important so that we can make sure we get our best results. So here's the last one. You'll notice this one doesn't look terrible, but there is a negative in the front, right? And what I told you guys is anytime I see a negative, I move it out. Okay, so I am going to factor out this negative. So let me take out the negative here, and it's basically just going to divide everything by a negative 1. So all the signs are going to change. So n squared minus 2n minus 15. And then I'm just going to focus on this little squiggly line area, but let's not lose sight on the negative in the front. Okay, so don't forget about that minus sign when you do your answer. So my A is 1, my B is negative 2, my C is negative 15. Okay, so putting my X here, A times C is negative 15, and my B is a negative 2. Two numbers that multiply to negative 15 that add to negative 2. 3 and negative what? Negative 5. Okay, so positive 3 you're saying, and a negative 5. So let me erase that. Positive 3 and a negative 5. So 3 times negative 5 is negative 15. 3 minus 5 is negative 2. So that's good. Always divide. So if I divide this by 1, positive 3 divided by 1 is just going to be a 3. So I don't have to do it. And negative 5 divided by 1 is just going to be another 5, negative 5. So I'm good. These are good answers. Okay? Because if I divide by 1, nothing changes. Okay? Nothing changes. So my solution is going to be, what is my letter? N. N plus 3 n minus 5, but then don't forget the minus in the front. Okay? Like I said, a lot of people, they'll forget that extra little piece and they'll do everything right, but they forget that there was a number in the front that originally you factored out, and it's just not part of your thinking process because you figured, well, I did all this other stuff already. That must be my solution. Don't forget about anything that you factor out. Okay? So this is, again, a review. This shouldn't be brand new stuff. Hopefully it's kind of clicking and you're like, oh yeah, I remember this stuff. That way you're not struggling with the homework. But if you are, let me know. If not, then good. All right. So here we go. Let me give you guys your homework.